practices in the Caribbean, promoting environmental stewardship, economic development, and food security. So that is the Caribbean Aquaculture Education and Innovation Hub, the organization that is hosting this event. They're also known as CAEIH. This is the umbrella organization for Women in Caribbean Aquaculture, Caribbean Aquaculture Network, and Youth in Aquaculture. And the great news about this organization is that it recently became a nonprofit organization just this year, 2024. So that's fantastic news for the organization. Now we have two presenters today, and they are Maxim Slayton and John Reed. Now, Maxim Slayton is the Director and Sales and Business Development at Aquasafra Incorporated. Now, Max graduated from the University of South Carolina in 2020 with a BS in Marine Science, where he was introduced to and became obsessed with aquaculture. Since then, he has worked in several unique positions for Aquasafra Inc., and the Global Seafood Alliance. This experience has allowed him to become proficient in specific culture techniques, as well as broader concepts, including, but not limited to, developing a seafood industry, improving related supply chains, and building an aquaculture brand. And our next presenter, our other presenter, is Mr. John Reed. He has been involved in aquaculture since 1979, and he has over 45 years experience in integrated aquaculture plant production. He is the managing partner of Aquasafra Inc., and he has been all over the world working in this industry in different climates, different parts of the world, such as Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia. Right now, he is based in the Bahamas, and he has done work all over the Caribbean as well. So we just want to welcome our two presenters and turn the stage, as it were, over to you both. So thank you, gentlemen, for agreeing to present on the work that you're doing at your organization.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Dr. Herbert. Thank you, Dr. Russo, as well, for the opportunity to share a little bit about our story and how we see aquaculture in the Caribbean moving forward. And so, as Dr. Herbert mentioned, my name is Max Slayton. I'm the Director of Sales for Aquasafra. We are a tilapia hatchery located here in Southwest Florida. Sort of between Tampa and Sarasota, if you're looking on a map. And yes, we are a tilapia hatchery, and as you've seen the video, very unique line of tilapia, very white and all white hybrid tilapia. And we have deep roots and deep ties to the Caribbean. We've had tilapia fingerlings in the Caribbean for 15 years. John, who I'll be turning things over to in a second, is currently sitting in the Caribbean. He's on the island of Eleuthera. And our fish are really catered for growth in the Caribbean. And we do represent a little bit of a different way of thinking and engaging with aquaculture in the region, and thinking of aquaculture as a solution to climate change and as a solution to regional food security. And we also want to return farming to its rightful place as a livelihood, as a profitable career, as an industry that attracts young people and that young people want to get into. And so, without further delay, let's get started here.
All right, thank you, Max, and thank you.
If I can change screen. So, oh, hold on, John, one second. So yeah, John Reed, as Dr. Herbert mentioned, has been in the game for a while, for 45 years, and really is a specialist in integrated aquaculture and hydroponic systems, and he's run the largest one in the United States for quite some time. And then myself, I'm a newer character to the industry, but I've been fortunate enough to spend time not only in tilapia production, but also in the global certification space, and really been focusing for the last 7 years on hatchery systems and how to build a hatchery brand. And then as we move through this webinar, we want to give a little bit of a general, broader Caribbean aquaculture overview and a bit of an introduction to multi-trophic aquaculture and how that fits into the future of Caribbean aquaculture as we see it. And then how Aquasafra can fit in not only in the multi-trophic space, but how we can grow the Caribbean sector as a whole. And then spend a little bit of time as well on this idea of localized genetic concepts. So localized traits that we think are winners in the Caribbean space, in aquaculture, and how we can grow Caribbean aquaculture using these genetic profiles. John?
Hi there. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Dr. Herbert and Dr. Russo, especially for putting all this together. It's a lot of work, so I very much appreciate all the efforts you guys provide to this. So I'm going to start briefly with sort of a general introduction with what it takes. What's the reason? Why are we trying to do this? You know, one of my personal goals and one of our goals as a company is to reduce the amount of imports of food that is shipped into the Caribbean. And everyone knows the numbers is, 80 to 90% of all the food is shipped in the Caribbean. Our mission is to reduce that to under 10% in the next 20 years. And that's going to take quite a lot. I mean, that's a big stake there to put in the ground to say what we're committing to. A key to that is making farming and especially aquaculture profitable for farmers. If you can make money doing it, people will do it. But to do this, we need to maximize efficiency and we need to maximize the simplicity of the farming systems. So Max, if you go to the next slide, and I have to click between my notes and the slide here to be sure that I'm talking on the right thing here. So my apologies. For some reason I can't get my notes to show at the same screen as the if you could go to the next slide. Well, let me just start off then with this. Sorry. Stay with this slide, please. To get imports under 10%, we need to integrate. We have to do it. We have to integrate farming as well as as well as seafood, as well as aquaculture and mariculture. So all of these different bases have to come together. I mean, you can't just farming can't feed the Caribbean by itself. Fishing can't feed the Caribbean by itself. None of them can do it. You need to blend all of them together instead of an integrated network of conventional farming, aquaculture, mariculture, and sustainable fisheries. So I'm going to focus on this talk here just about the particular part of aquaculture and freshwater aquaculture relative to this, and in particular, multi-trophic aquaculture. So Max, if you could go to the next slide then. So the key, just as one more reinforcement on the concept here, is that there's 45 million people in the Caribbean to feed. So that's quite a daunting number to get at. So in order to do that, besides the bit about having everything come together, we need to focus on species of fish that are most efficient. And for that, in our case, that's tilapia. They're vegetarian, and most importantly, they're a freshwater fish. And why that's important is that if you're using freshwater systems, you can recycle the nutrients and the wastes that come out of aquaculture. If you're dumping all that feed into marine systems, that nutrient load and all those wastes are lost to the ocean. Now you can do multi-trophic marine systems. You can put seaweeds and sea cucumbers around those fed systems, but it leaks out. It's not as efficient to have fed marine systems. And I could be saying something controversial for some people here, but I'll just state that, and we can have that debate later. So Max, if you could switch to the next slide here. So what multi-trophic does for us in terms of feeding efficiency? Actually, I'm going to click to the next slide for myself. Okay, is that Max, if you could just jump right to the next slide, to slide 8, please. We'll just jump to that there. Okay, good. So what multi-trophic does for us is it's 70% utilization of the feed. And that's super important. So feed is roughly 80% of the cost of aquaculture. So if you're taking, in most cases, when you feed a fish, 25% of what you feed a fish is converted into fish, but 75% of that feed is lost as manure. And it's like drinking a bottle of wine, and you drink a quarter of the bottle and you pour out the rest of it on the ground. It's incredibly wasteful. So you've got to make money from that leftover feed. And so tilapia convert 25% of what they eat into seafood, into themselves. Now that sounds pretty bad, only 25%, but consider poultry. Poultry only converts 15% of what they feed. So 85% of poultry diets are manure in the end. And that sounds pretty bad until you consider beef cattle. 2% of what you feed them becomes beef, and 98% is loss of manure. So aquaculture already is quite ahead in terms of feed utilization, just without multi-trophics. But if you then go back to that leftover 75%, about 20% of that can be successfully incorporated into various crustaceans. In our case, we focus on freshwater shrimp, but a lot of different options. So about 20% more of your feed can be consumed by crustaceans. Another roughly 20% can be, of that 75% can be taken up with mollusks. And in the end, about 10% can be utilized by plants. So that gets you between 65 and 70% utilization of your feed. Now that's where you've got to be to really become profitable. You've got to use that feed and make money with it. Now you're almost tripling the saleable product you have for that same feed input that you put in. So that's sort of the key and the crux for aquaculture and for multi-trophics, why it matters. So let me, if you go, Max, please, to slide 9 here. So the key then for after you utilizing that feed really efficiently, you have to have the feed itself be the most efficient feed you can get. And that has a lot of things to it. Of course, you have to have the feed be as inexpensive as it can. And feed is probably a big topic we could talk a lot about that the Caribbean really is challenged with. Getting it into the region, producing it locally versus importing it, there's a lot to it. And that's something we don't have a great solution for in terms of getting the feed. But what we can do is provide solutions with our fish that eat locally produced feed very efficiently. And also our focus is on grass-based diets. So breeding fish that grow better on lower protein diets. So that's a cheaper feed and a feed that you can make regionally more successfully. Talking with a friend of mine, Maya Averill, who's at the CEI, Cape Eleuthera Institute, has been doing a lot of work with producing local feeds from fish meal wastes in the area and blending in regional ingredients. And our fish have grown extremely well on those regional diets. And that's sort of some of the fruits of the labor we've been doing with our genetics breeding, is getting fish to grow on the local diets that you can get that are affordable, as opposed to importing expensive, high quality feeds. But specifically, I'll mention a quick plug here for feeds that are carbon negative, meaning feeds that sequester carbon in the ground as new topsoil. So our focus is on grass-based diets, which can sequester carbon into the ground. And if we can get enough grass diets growing around the planet, we can have a material impact on reducing climate change. And that's a whole nother topic, but I'll just park it there, that we need efficient use of the feed with multi-trophics, and you need to have then the fish themselves be able to eat low cost, low protein feeds. So Max, if you could go to the next slide here. So this is what I'm referring to as our future. So the long-term perspective of what is necessary for the region, and specifically how is Aquasafra, how are we working on getting us there? So multi-trophics, we already spoke about, that's the most efficient use of the feed. Species grow better on lower quality local diets. And that's what we're working on, is to breeding tilapia to get as low as a 20% diet. So right now we're at about a 30% diet that they grow well on, as low as 30%, which is quite a jump from needing. Some of the farms we work with feed 34, some feed 38% protein to tilapia. So getting it down to 30%, that's a good step in the right direction, but we're shooting for 20. The next thing is to really jump growth rates. Right now, tilapia can get to commercially to 2 pounds in 8 to 9 months, depending on how well you lay things out with your farms and how you feed and how professionally you manage that feed. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But the potential is there to get tilapia to be rivaling the growth rates of poultry. And that's one of the bigger things we're working on developing with getting fish to grow in a much, much faster equivalent. And that allow all of these things then drive towards the profitability of the regional farmers. So going back to the very beginning here, if farmers can't make money, they're not going to do it. And I have many friends here in the Bahamas, and they say, oh, my grandfather used to be a farmer, and my great-grandmother was a farmer, but not many people are doing it anymore. It's hard work, and there's kind of a stigma around it. So we really got to make the profitability of the industry drive that and change that, where you can say, I'm a farmer and I'm making a lot of money. And the other folks go, hey, I want some of that. And then we can really then grow the business that way. So that's the focus for us. So let me turn this back over to you, Max, for your next step here.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, John, for touching on those points, and to echo John's comments. It's about trying to kind of find creative ways to make aquaculture work economically in specific regions like the Caribbean, and I think we've got a great sort of pathway to get there. But just to continue that line of thought, I call it the 4 pillars of aquaculture industry growth, and there's probably a better way to describe that. But these sort of 4 hurdles that we need to, and John touched on a couple of them over the last few minutes, that we need to address and then get over. And so the first one is broodstock or seed supply. And Aquasafra, I think, certainly can answer a lot of those questions, and I'll touch on the specifics of our line of tilapia here shortly. Part 2 to that is having a labor force, right, that has technical knowledge or that has culturing techniques and resources available to them to produce a brood line efficiently. And that's something where, again, I think Aquasafra and our team and partnership can really work towards. The third component of that is just general supply chain issues. And we've seen this not only in the Caribbean, but throughout the aquaculture space really since COVID. And that could be feed, that could be labor, that could be a marketability component. So there's a lot that can fit into that sort of broad supply chain topic. And then, yeah, specifically markets and brand, right? And how do we address that as an industry to allow for sort of the continued growth of the aquaculture space in the Caribbean? And again, John highlighted that magic number, right? 45 million mouths to feed in the Caribbean, which is a lot higher than I thought it was prior to this presentation when we looked it up. So that's quite and considering the amount of food that is imported, that's quite a market for Caribbean producers to look at and think, how can we efficiently produce a product to contribute towards not only food security in the region, but carbon negative food security and carbon negative food input. So speaking about Aquasafra's fish specifically, and a lot of the data that I'm going to reference here has come from some growth trials from the Cape Eleuthera Institute in the Bahamas, and some growth data that we have here in the United States. And again, here in South Florida, I think we're actually, from a climate perspective, quite similar to a lot of the microclimates that we see throughout the Caribbean. And we do have Caribbean red lines in and around South Florida, so we have good data points there as well when we compare our line to these traditional Caribbean red lines. And I will just stop there and acknowledge that for a long time, the Caribbean tilapia space has really produced almost exclusively a red tilapia. And while that is something different, and I do want to acknowledge that, right? It's a different sort of visual profile. But as we've engaged with more producers in the region to try to come up with solutions in the industry, and again, these are producers that have reached out to us looking to engage. we have found that a white tilapia, this ivory colored tilapia, is really, from a market and cultural perspective, really quite appealing and really a universally appreciated fish and color. And again, quite synonymous with some wild caught species that we see throughout the region, whether you want to look at a white grunt, a silver snapper, things of that sort. So we were actually really pleasantly surprised to hear the amount of folks throughout the region that were excited about working with a white tilapia. But so just moving on, and again, a lot of this data point coming from Cape Eleuthera and a little bit that we've seen in Florida, comparing our line of tilapia to traditional Caribbean red lines. And so growth, this should not be that surprising. We're just 200 to 300% faster across the board from a pure growth rate perspective. The reason that I say that is not surprising is that red tilapia, these red urea tilapia, have a lot of attractive traits, a lot of attractive characteristics, especially from a survival and hardiness perspective. And we carry a lot of those same traits over, and I'll get to that in a second. But they're plagued by slow growth, and that's just a trait of the red tilapia. They just grow really slowly, and so we bring in, again, this is from our hybrid fry that we produce, and I'll get to that component here shortly as well. We just grow 2 to 3 times faster. And again, FCR, very similar. Again, this is all related to our growth performance. We're 25 to 30% more efficient in feed conversion. And that's a pretty easy number for aquaculturists to relate to, because that's just 25 to 30% savings on your feed bill, which should be your biggest cost. So again, these are great characteristics to have in a line of tilapia. The diet component, which John touched on, really happy to hear about local Caribbean specific diets using local inputs, whether that be bycatch, whether that be processing remains, local vegetarian inputs, and growing really, really well on those feed inputs. And yeah, to John's point, we think already on a commercial diet that we can grow at 30% or maybe even less, 28% perhaps, but that we are also scalable to a local diet, and that these tilapia can grow really well on a local diet. And it's all about making a line of fish resilient and efficient to the specific region. It's one thing to have these laboratory statistics, which we can bounce around all day, but if it's not relatable to the farmer, then it's really not scalable long term. And then fillet yield, we've seen similarly impressive numbers from a fillet yield perspective of just being about 10% better, a little bit more actually, 10, 11% better fillet yield than the traditional Caribbean red lines. And again, that should be a pretty easy number for everyone to grasp, because that's just 10 to 11% more meat on the bone. So when we talk about food production, when we talk about food security, having a fish that just has 10 to 11% more protein attached to it is an important concept. And then here we have some growth charts, some raw data. Again, these were some components that were presented at the end of 2023. Some of this will be presented again later on this year. And we can talk, if you want to talk raw data, you can reach out to several people on this call. Okay, so whoops. So let's just continue on this genetic lineage conversation. So our Nilotica is so we are a hybrid, create a hybrid fry, and the reason that we use create a hybrid fry is this theory of hybrid vigor, right? Which is this biological theory that states essentially that the offspring of two different but related species often outperforms the parents through basic by some percentage, basically across the board, whether that be growth, survival, other phenotypic characteristics. And so that's what we play on here, and we see that in tilapia quite clearly. And we are a Manzala-based Nilotica male, which is really, really a key factor as well. Again, this is Lake Manzala. This is coming from northern Egypt, which is just a hardier, it's a rougher area of the world than some of the Lake Victoria lines that originated in the past. And additionally, it's not a gift-based Nilotica line. Gift-based fish have, for those who've been following sort of broader global tilapia production over the last 18 to 24 months, has been just a cataclysmic disaster. They're just not very robust, and while they do grow a little bit quicker, they just can't make it to market. And the best characteristic for any tilapia or any broodstock line across seafood is making it to market. And so again, Aquasafra, we pride ourselves on being the fastest growing tilapia that actually makes it to market with over 90% yields in real life growing conditions, not a lab. So how did we actually get to that? Well, we've been isolated on our hatchery for over 30 years. That has allowed us to turn over both the Manzala nilotica male and the pure line Aria female 23 times each. That's 46 generations of progress, which is, again, just fantastic. When you look at some of the new genetics programs around the world, they are right around generation 10 to 15. So you can really see the difference in where we've been able to accelerate progress, especially on the hardiness and in climate resiliency side, which is just more and more important day by day as the effects of climate change become more clear. And so, yeah, again, going back to that, an efficient fish that grows out well, right, with all these characteristics, right, improved growth rate, improved food conversion rate, that can grow on a local diet, that can have a better fillet yield, and it can make it to market in a wide variety of growing conditions. And I'll just throw out some numbers here. We had fish this past year in 37-degree water, which is just unbelievable, not die and actually make it to market with around a 90% return, which is just something that we're really, really proud of and really happy to be able to offer a product that gives farmers peace of mind that regardless of bizarre climate events, major hurricanes, droughts, that they have a product that they can still make it to market, that they won't lose the crop cycle. And that's, again, a core mission of ours is to reverse climate change. And so breeding a line of fish that's actually climate resilient, it just works hand in hand with that. And again, speaking of the white tilapia, I just want to mention, from a heat perspective, they outperform traditional dark Nile tilapia because they're able to actually reflect heat. This is sort of a hidden thing that we've discovered recently, which just kind of makes sense. These white fish just do not attract heat the way that the dark fish do in the water. Of course, tilapia being cichlid, especially during active feeding, have a tendency to be right around the surface of the water, and our fish just reflect sunlight more efficiently, and that just gives them that an extra couple of percentage points of heat resilience, heat tolerance in a climate, which again is really important. Some other things, every fish that leaves our property here, we have 3 million. You saw the videos. Those videos I actually took yesterday. We have over 3 million fish on our property right now. So really, to describe sort of our commercial capacity, but every fish that leaves the property is vaccinated against 3 unique lines of streptococcus, which is again a key concern for a lot of folks in different countries, because access to vaccines and medicated treatments can be difficult. And then this white fish that you've seen throughout the presentation really does allow for marketability and for a unique presentation, particularly in a whole fish or a gutted fish or even a skin-on product form. The white tilapia really offers the farmer or the seller a lot of options. And so we've had a lot of fun conversations with folks throughout the Caribbean and even in the Americas who are really excited about working and growing a white tilapia, which will then unlock some new fun marketing things that they can use. And we've heard ivory, we've heard white tilapia, we've heard St. Peter's fish. There's a lot of opportunities in the marketplace to be different than just some of the traditional red or even dark tilapia forms. So I hope this has been fairly insightful, really insightful, not only on how we see the Caribbean aquaculture space in general, but how multi-trophic aquaculture can fit into that, and how Aquasafra's line really allows for growth opportunity, not only in the sector, but for the specific farmer. And how a localized genetic profile or genetic profile that works actually for farms and real life growing conditions, not lab-based numbers. And again, aquaculture is famous, and there's a lot of companies, unfortunately, that are out there that throw these graphs up, and I can make the graphs look however we want. I mean, you can create whatever silly conditions in a laboratory to show that on paper, but if it doesn't work for the farmer, it's not a scalable product, and it's not a product that frankly should be being pushed. And so, and again, with our mission of being more climate focused, being more focused on the future, producing something that actually works for farmers of all types throughout the Caribbean regions and even into the Americas is really, really important for us. And John, I'll throw things back to you. And I don't think we talked to Dr. Russo about this, but just to pitch a future webinar that we may do, date to be announced. We do want to help farmers begin to think about how they can run their businesses, run their facilities more efficiently. So, John.
Yeah, thanks, Max. So really, we talked about genetics, feeds, and production. You got to have the genetics right. You got to have the feed right. We haven't talked about production. And production starts first with the farm design. How do you make that work? That's a big topic. I won't go there. But once you have the farm design set right, and a good design, of course, makes your life much easier than a bad design. After that, production technique is everything. And Max, if you could go to the next slide, please. The production technique is what we are proposing to discuss in this next seminar, how to very specifically manage a very simple process. Because I mentioned at the very beginning, we have to have profitability. It also has to be simple for people to do. It can't be, apologies to all of the folks here who have doctorates. It should be that you don't have to have a doctorate to make these farms profitable. That should be very simple and straightforward. And so this chart design process, and again, this is a small advertisement for the next seminar about how we can make a very simple sort of 1, 2, 3 process in terms of how your feed is calculated, how you do the dip nets, and how your fish are growing. Based upon how the fish grow, you then set up your feed charts for the next week. And it's a very simple 1, 2, 3 process. And I'll just, Max, if you just quickly click to the next slide. We have a very simple feed chart. And then Max, click the next one. Then you have a very simple dip net chart where you have to sample your fish every 2 or 3 weeks to see how fast they're growing. And then based upon that, you fill out some simple math. And this can be done in Excel or just with a calculator. This sets up how you're going to feed your fish for the next week, because you have to feed efficiently. The old ways, we used to just throw feed in the pond and wait for the fish to eat what they're going to eat, and you got what you got 8 months later. That worked, when you're a backyard farmer. But to make commercial aquaculture profitable, you've got to have a system and charts and manage it. And it's very simple. So what we're going to set up as a program is go through these simple charts for those who are interested. Be curious to hear maybe in the chat section if people could say, well, what interest they would have in going through this type of system. We will also, for farmers of a significant size, if you're buying a good number of our fry, what we do with some of our farmers is we put a WhatsApp group up for each farm. And what they do is every day they text us a picture of the first chart. And then each day, if it looks great, we say nothing. But if there's an issue, we can pipe in quickly. This or that can be corrected. So we will stand by the farmers and guide them through a daily process of how to grow their fish. And then that way we can be ahead of the trouble before it happens. And again, that's then simple. Often we have farmers who don't talk to us for 3 months, and all of a sudden there's a big urgency, and we go running down to help them, and we discover there's something they did 2 months ago that would have avoided this problem. So really about developing efficient charting and production of your process. So I'll just pause with that. Again, that can be our next topic, because once you have all this other stuff, you've got good fish, you've got good feeds, you got to have a production system that's also efficient. And these charts, simple 3 charts, makes the whole system work very simply with a good farm design. So I'll pause there. And one thing I throw in, one last thing, is that we've been at this now for quite a few years. But the person who really started this was a fellow named Mike Piketty. And he really built the foundations of this first, the foundations of the industry in Florida, and then of course around the world, having developed some of the bigger farms all over the world. So we're really carrying on a legacy. We're standing on the shoulders of a lot of people. As Max said, 40 plus generations. We didn't do that all ourselves. This is a team, a multi-generational team that's really built this forward. So just to give a shout out to some of the people who've helped bring this to the place where we're at, well, we can now take it to the next level and build on this to make everyone else that much better at this. So I'll pause with that. Any other wrap up? And then we have a series of questions and ideally answers that we may have for your questions.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, so very much for your presentation. We have posted the company's bio in the chat, but I just want to pull some things out of it before we move on to the questions because we have a few. So Aquasafra has assembled an elite management team with over 100 years of production and breeding experience, and you both alluded to that. And what you're hearing as well, which is also in their bio, this team is eager to work with producers in the Caribbean. So we want to hear from you all. I'm not sure what countries are represented here. We have two persons that have questions. So I'll read the questions out one by one. So question, then you guys answer, then we'll move on. So Britta Kautzman, soon to be PhD. She's a PhD candidate in Portugal. She has a question. She says in her project, she will go on feed-based, on fermented local agricultural byproducts such as palm oil kernels, cocoa pulp, and banana peel, all organic. To get higher protein values, brewer's yeast from the local brewery and carbo bread tree fruit flour will be used as well. And her question is, do you have any experience on feeds based on these sources?
I'll probably take that because I have worked quite a bit with palm oil product in Indonesia in particular. And of course, it works wonderfully. So everything is, as they say, there's more than one way to skin a catfish in the process. So it really comes down to building the nutritional profile, balancing your amino acids, balancing your protein, balancing your fat. And so all those ingredients you have listed there are quite great. So if you have an abundance of those, that's the big thing. The key is, of course, having the volume of those ingredients and then consistently having that so the feed mill knows how to incorporate them consistently. If you're changing every other day, you can do that. It's what they call least cost rationing, and it's a process where you put in every other month, you may have a different ingredient, but that's quite complicated because each time you change ingredient, you got to adjust the nutrient profile for that changed nutrient. So consistency, and then just you got to put it together, test it, send it to the labs, see how it works, and of course do your feed trials. So I'm not saying anything super brilliant in this comment, but I think all of those can work quite well. It just takes time to tune that for your production cycles.
And the only other thing I would just add to John's comment is finding, and again, I'm not as totally familiar with everything that's happening in Portugal, but finding a variant of species that can perform on that diet as well, that will actually can give some productive feed trial results. Because again, as John and I have touched on, and again, as a sort of plug for our line of fish, there's not a lot of species or more specific, not a lot of genetic lines out there that are conformable to local diets, unfortunately. And this is something that has just been overlooked, not only in tilapia, but this was overlooked in Penaids for a long time. It's certainly been being overlooked in salmon right now. This quest for growth rate is one thing that has made these lines a lot more vulnerable to irregularities or to changes in things like feed. And so finding a line that's kind of built inside out, at least from that sort of traditional mindset, built kind of backwards from that, built on hardiness, built on resiliency, built on sort of adverse conditions and working with some irregular circumstances, I think would also be key to any trials.
Let me throw in one last comment about this question. I mentioned again, going for high protein. People in the aquaculture industry have an addiction to protein. And our focus is to try and put as little protein as possible. Of course, now that excludes a lot of species, which is why we're focusing on low protein eating species. But in terms of affordability, high protein just isn't going to be affordable over the long run. And it becomes limiting. And of course, people, of course, use fish meal right now to fill that protein gap, but that's got lots of troubles with issues with the fish meal industry. So I just make a caution to see how, now you can get, even for a higher protein eating species like salmon, you can lower the protein if all the other nutrients are balanced properly. Certain enzymes and different things are present. You can feed a lower protein and get away with it. But don't look to high protein being the cure to all the problems. See how low can you go on the protein side. And for us, of course, we can do that with tilapia quite low, but other species, see how low you can go, because protein will become the bottleneck for all future feeds.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer. I'm not sure if, Britta, you have any other questions based on their answer. You can feel free to write any further questions in the chat. But in the meantime, we'll move on to Dr. Clara Camargo. She has a couple of questions. Her first question is, tilapia aquaculture faces several pathogen challenges. How does the fast growth family line perform in this scenario? Does it show good disease resistance? Are you doing any research associating the food offered with the microbiome and the immunomodulation factors? So that's one question. I'll allow you guys to answer.
All right. Well,
I start with that. I'll add in something.
That's fine. Yeah, 2023, in back end of 2022, all of 2023, and even the start of this year. So if we take kind of the last 24 months, single line breeding programs in tilapia, and I talked about gift earlier, but fast I think is a similar thing, although not as popular for whatever reason in the commercial setting. It's just a complete disaster, and it has nothing to do with the fast or the gift programs originally, and everything to do with how those lines have been extrapolated over the last, let's say, 15, 20 years, which is that every major sort of genetic company that has taken these lines and then tried to run with it, or even some of the bigger companies that have closed their own loops, have selected almost exclusively for growth, and they've done so in a laboratory PCR setting. And what that has created is some advancement, certainly in growth rate. Certainly the first few years or first few generations that you do that, you can see tremendous advances in growth rate. But you sacrifice almost every other characteristic. And so pretty much universally across the board, what we've seen in the last 24 months is that lines without urea in them, and that would be fast, that would be gift, that would be other single line programs that exist, have just very, very little hardiness. And so as soon as you take them out of the lab, you can experience just tremendous losses. And we're talking with farmers now in 2024 that are growing gift-based lines and having between 70 and 80% mortality through the grow out cycle. That is just a crazy number. It's not sustainable to the growth of the industry, and certainly extremely, extremely inefficient. And okay, maybe there are some regions of the world where you could get away with that, although I would argue pretty heavily against it. But when we look at, this is the Caribbean Aquaculture Network. So when we look at regions throughout the Caribbean and throughout some of the Americas, doing something like that is just not an option. And so getting to market becomes trait number one. So that's kind of point A. And then point B, just before I sort of pass the baton over to John. There's a lot of responsibility that you can take from a food input perspective to try to protect yourself against other things. And so again, if everything in the environment is great, like a laboratory setting of perfectly clean water, the diet is perfect, you have perfect balance between all your macro and your micronutrient components, then sure, you can have some benefits from a fast line, maybe. But as soon as one thing is out of kilter, and what I will specify is real world growing conditions, where in every farm nothing is exactly perfect, real world growing conditions, it's just a lost cause. And so even specific enhancements to feed become very, very difficult to to justify. John?
Yeah, so I'll throw in two things. One, there are some lines that have tried to breed in disease resistant, particularly resistance to strep, and that works pretty well, but it takes them 3 or 4 years to get a particular resistance to a strain in a line, but strep can evolve and change as fast as every 6 months. So the process of trying to breed resistance into fish, into tilapia in particular, has proven to be, we just can't stay up on it fast. And we all experienced from our days of COVID. The virus itself was changing and they had to keep updating the vaccines. So our focus has been on developing vaccines that we can adapt rapidly to the changing environment of the bacterial or viral diseases. Fortunately, right now we have good vaccines for the bacterial side, still coming on the viral side. But that's the first basis. We do have a trivalent, 3 different strains of strep vaccinated on our fish, plus good adjuvants, which mean it absorbs and incorporates the vaccine. But also,
Don, can I interject here a second? Sorry. So we have a few students here on call with us that are they're learning about aquaculture. So there's some terminology that you're using. Would you be able to expand a little bit on what is the gift? What is gift, so that they can understand what is it that you're talking about?
Let me throw one thing in, John, and I'll answer the acronyms as well.
Let me interrupt the interruption quickly, saying that the second part, besides vaccination, is kicking off the gut microbiome to make the fish itself super healthy. So you can do a lot with genetics and vaccines, but you have to grow the fish. And one of the things we do is we give a very live feed diet to our fish at a very early stage. So they have a really strong microbiome developed in their gut that allows them to digest better, but it also gives them a harder immune response to all kinds of other challenges. So there's genetics, there's vaccines, and you've got to feed your fry really efficiently and kick off their gut microbiome to start. So I'll just put that part in addition to how we control for disease. But Max, go ahead with an acronyms then.
Yeah, sure. And I think GIFT is genetically improved fast tilapia, and I think FAST is fast action something. I don't know the FAST acronym, but something
that come out of the Philippines, and particularly initially an institute in the Philippines called ICLARM back in the late 70s and early 80s, and they just kept breeding and breeding. So the GIFT line is now mostly pushed forward by WorldFish as a company, and they have been pushing the GIFT line, but other people have taken the GIFT line and developed it in their own vein as well. So it, as Max said, it's an acronym for a fast-growing line, initially developed in the Philippines, but now it's around the world. People are furthering that line.
Yeah, and the United Nations had a lot of money behind advancement programs as well for specifically in developing areas, and then a lot of big aquaculture companies took those lines for themselves and then carried on their breeding program because they were perceived to be the fastest growing. And then just for the students, I think there's a big difference between breeding for resistance and breeding for immunity. And unfortunately, in aquaculture, every species seems to, and the companies behind them, seem to be falling for the trap of breeding for immunity. And as John said, that just doesn't work. It works in a lab where you only have that specific variant, and you can do enough disease trials to select for fish that can survive that variant. But as soon as you go outside of the lab setting and encounter the pathogens of the world, that sort of idea crumbles. And so for a line of tilapia that's, let's say, strep immune, they're strep immune against a single strain of a single variant. And so as soon as they're exposed to anything else, not only are they not immune to it, but they haven't built up any resistance as a line to sort of get past that situation. And so what we have done is taken the opposite approach and bred for resistance instead of immunity. And then we supplement that in with a vaccine program, like John said, where we can adapt a vaccine in just a few weeks to match any new variant of disease that we encounter, that any of our farms encounter. And so that just allows and creates a much more resilient fish and a much, in what I think, a sustainable way and responsible way of going about this. And so, breeding for resistance, I think, is the pathway forward, as opposed to breeding for immunity. Because if you're just resistant to everything, you're strong, you can overcome these challenges. If you're immune to one thing, that's great as long as you're only dealing with that one thing. But then as soon as a different variant or some other stressor comes into play, not only are you not immune to that one thing, you're extremely vulnerable to everything else.
Yeah, just to add that there's a range of pathogens. We've been discussing just strep as one of them, but there's quite a few others. But they're the primary key pathogens that are stressing the industry currently. And we will, as others become more predominant, like, for example, tilapia lake virus, that's a viral. There is not a good vaccine for that right now. We just need to keep it out. And that's where working with very good disease control and line control is important. But there's a range of pathogens we can't get into now, but the key pathogen is strep that we focus on and have some good protections. But the general hardiness of urea into our line, plus the gut health that we create for our fry, that gives us resistance to a lot of other pathogens as they show up in different people's farm environments.
Okay, thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes left in the meeting, and we have more questions than time. So I'm just going to direct you both to the chat. One thing I'll do is read one more set of questions for you to answer. And if there are any comments or any questions that you'd like to reply to, feel free to use the chat to do so. So one person, Dr. Camargo, she asks whether you ship juveniles to Caribbean islands, what the average cost is, and also, what do you consider market size? So basically those 3 questions will be the last verbal question I will read. The last question I will read rather, and you can, when I turn over to Dr. Russo, you can use the chat to interact. All right, how does that sound?
All right, that
I'll
sounds
answer some of the questions, but Max, why don't you go with the first question there
sure.
about how we ship and all
Yes,
that.
short answer to that is yes, we do ship fingerlings to the Caribbean and have been doing so to a variety of islands for a while now. So the average cost of that, again, we sell our fingerlings, again, sort of depends on the volume of the facility that we're talking about, but in US dollars, somewhere between 9 and 12 cents, probably, depending on the size of the operation. And then freight costs, again, that without knowing the island and the time frame becomes a little bit more difficult to predict. But yes, we do ship out to the Caribbean, and it's from a logistics perspective for us, it's not a big challenge. And was there a part B? Oh, market size. Yeah, market size for in the Caribbean, and it's the producers that we have been speaking with, market size about 400 grams ish, plus or minus, let's say 50 grams, somewhere even lower, maybe even 300 in certain areas, depending on sort of the target market. In the United States, it's a bit more than that, but in the Caribbean, we see 400 to 350 to 450 grams.
Generically, our fish can get in roughly 8 months, they can get up to 2 pounds. And the rough market size here in the US is about 1.8 pounds, 1.7, 1.8 pounds is the standard market size here. And that's 8 to 9 months. In a perfect, really good RAS environments, we can hit that in 7 months. But generally in outside pond, cage, raceway type environments, it's an 8-month cycle to get to that 1.8 pound size.
Okay, so don't forget, there are some questions in the chat. What I'll do is I'll read one more. I think we should have time for one more. And Leanne Moore, she asks, does the gift suffer the issue of high mortality if they're slowly introduced to a similar environment, one that may be harsher and closer to their new living conditions. Leanne, if I got that right, just let me know if I did, and if you need me to adjust the question. So that question is posed to either of you, and then I'll turn over to Dr.
Quickly,
Russo.
since there's little time, gift, all fish benefit from being slowly introduced to their environment. So, you know, for temperature purposes, pH, shocking, etc. But after that, it has to do with the environment. And the biggest issue has been heat. So the hot ponds overheating due to climate change. So some of the ponds consistently are hitting 78, 79. A few of them went over 100 in Florida this last summer. We're still in the middle of it now. So that's a hard thing to acclimatize yourself to, is that temperature. So generally acclimatizing helps a little bit for all lines, but once you're in, you know, past a week, they're as acclimatized they're going to get. And then they just have to be able to handle what comes at them. And that's where the different lines starts to matter a lot.
Okay, thank you so much. Maxim Slayton, John Reed, we want to thank both of you gentlemen for presenting on the tilapia aquaculture, for representing Aquasafra. You have a wealth of information. It is very, very obvious that there's so many questions you can answer because of what you have experienced in the company over the last few years. Thank you so very much. We will turn over to our director, Dr. Julianne Russo. She'll talk a little bit about some fundraising that the organization hosting this webinar will be undertaking.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to take a few seconds of your time. I am the founder of the Caribbean Aquaculture Education Hub. And as Nicole said, we just became a nonprofit organization. We've been hosting these webinars for the last 3 years. Our mission is to connect our Caribbean aquaculture enthusiasts, professionals, scientists, with regional, from people all over the Caribbean as well as globally. And as you can see, Maxime and John have become a part of the family, and we are very excited to open up aquaculture to farmers and persons all over the Caribbean. Are now trying to do a fundraising because our mission is education, and we believe because there is not a tertiary program throughout the Caribbean that is really vital and important, as John spoke about in the beginning, that aquaculture now becomes something really important for food security. And we need to take it to the next level to compete with global companies and aquaculture. We want to be able to get to that level where we understand, here we're talking about genetics, streptococcus, viruses, disease, biosecurity. We know that there are many, many persons that don't understand this terminology. And so we really need to have this education that is brought to a wider audience. And so we are trying to start fundraising so that we can bring our education programs. We want to do more of this networking. And more specifically, for the very, very first time, we have found Caribbean scientists. There are few of us, but quite doing some really, really important work that persons don't know about, and majority are women. And so we are trying to fundraise to bring we have already found funding and sponsorship for 10. So we're trying to bring 14 in all to the World Aquaculture Society Conference. It's a Latin American and Caribbean chapter. It's in Colombia this year, and John has been generous and has helped us sponsor us. I appreciate that so far. And so we are looking to raise $10,000 to send 4 more to the conference. This is going to be a very, very first time for us. And so we're pretty excited to have a cohort of scientists. We need more scientists to research, and the innovation to help our entrepreneurs and farmers. So please, if you can, whatever you can, share the donation. I posted the donation site. Visit our website, visit our newsletter for more events, and whatever you can, really, really appreciate it. And our next event is going to be next week. It's going to be really, really great. It's going to be 5 innovators, 5 women innovators in the seaweed sector. And there are incredible women doing businesses in the seaweed sector. So please sign up to our newsletter so you can get that link. Actually, I'm going to put it in the post. And I really appreciate you coming back. And John and Maxime are going to be back with more talks. So please write to us and let us know what you want to learn about, and we'll be presenting them. So thank you so much again for coming.
You're welcome. It's been great fun to talk and share, and let's grow. Let's get this growing.
Yeah, thank you, Dr.
Any
Russo.
last
And
comment?
yeah, to
Yes.
everyone in the chat, please don't hesitate to reach out to either John or myself, any other questions, and we will be in and around the Caribbean this year and the Americas. So please reach out, and we can even arrange some in-person meetings to discuss future growth in the Caribbean.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.